Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the broadcast. It is June 1st, 2017. Tonight's webinar is about manipulation. It's about the relationship between parent and child and how, through a process that we call in psychology projective identification, we can be pulled into or induced into a response that's not helpful for the process and oftentimes actually exacerbates it. So I'm going to talk about ways that we manipulate, but I'm also going to talk about the psychology of it, what's going on between two individuals in relationship. I don't like the idea that we talk about or simply describe somebody as manipulative because, in essence, what we're saying is that they are capable of influencing others to get what they want. And there's nothing inherently wrong or bad about that. But the second reason that I take issue with that is because not everybody is the same amount of manipulative to everybody else. So something that might be manipulative for you, for example, might not be manipulative to me. There are certain triggers and access points that I have that you don't have, and vice versa. And so, really, a lot of times when we talk about somebody being manipulative, we're really making a confession. And as parents, we have installed the buttons. Not only do they push our buttons, but we install them and we gave them directions. It's through a series of interactions that we see that our children are capable of pushing our buttons, of finding our triggers. Because the ones that don't work just fall out of practice. And the ones that work and are reinforced, of course, become more common. One of the things we see at Evoke, and this is not a critique on any specific parent, but when we see children come into the program, they'll try what works at home for them to get what they want. It might be aggression, it might be feeling sorry for themselves or presenting as helpless, on and on and on. And what happens if you can maintain an appropriate clinical distance detachment, you say to the child, you say, I imagine that worked for you at home. And ideally, we learn, we practice, and very intentionally not to respond in the old ways. And oftentimes, in a matter of weeks, for most students, a significant amount of that behavior is erased, doesn't show up anymore, it's extinguished. Of course, during times of stress, it still shows up. It still shows up at times of conflict or difficulty. But you can see on a base level a lot of that behavior going away. So that's the preface, kind of the prologue to tonight's webinar. I like this story because I think it exemplifies how subtle the process can be. I was covering for a therapist one time as clinical director. And so I come in kind of cold. I spent a week with the therapist before he went on vacation, and then I spent the week that he was on vacation working with this group. And during that in between, a student got injured, was taken into the clinic. Things were addressed. He didn't break his ankle, actually. He just sprained it. But we were going to sit with the group, and everything was taken care of medically. And as they were coming back out to the field, we realized that the weather was such that it wouldn't be a good trip out. So we instead had the staff stay with him in a hotel overnight and then took him out the next morning. And casually, he wrote in his letter to his mother that this had happened, to his parents that this has happened. He wrote it as if in passing. The mother, of course, called me because I was covering, shared with me her frustration that she wasn't aware. She was aware of the ankle injury, but she wasn't aware of the overnight visit. And after apologizing and telling her that is something that we would ideally report to you, and I apologize and won't happen again, I said, can I broach the clinical issue here? Can I talk about the potential clinical issue here? And she said, of course, sure. And I said, do you think your child was pushing your buttons? Was trying to get you into that mode of rescuing that I think you've identified as been a part of your past? She said, not in this instance, not at all. So I said, okay. Sounds okay. So I then went back out to the field, and I was driving out to the field. I parked my car, and before I even made it to the camp, a student waddled up to me in the snow and said, did you hear from my mom? What did she have to say about my visit to the clinic and staying overnight? And of course, my response was, oh, we talked about it. Yeah, she's fine with it. But it was so powerful, so on the front part of his brain, but it came across so incredibly subtle. So one of the questions that I always ask parents is, how do you feel initially? when your child calls? This could be not even at a vote, but how do you feel when your child calls you, initiates a particular discussion? And so we look to see if the feeling you're having is potentially consciously or unconsciously intended by your child. And again, this is not a simple, superficial, kids are manipulative. This is something we all do to each other. It's called projective identification. Projection is where I project onto you my feelings and thought. Projective identification is where I induce in you a certain feeling with a likely response. So I want to be aware of those things and to work with a therapist, to work with a coach is one of the ways that we can become more conscious of it, more intentional in our response. And at times, this goes with all responses to all behaviors. There are times when after we've done a significant amount of work around it, that we actually have to, what I like to say is override the feeling, override the natural impulse, right? When we know in our head what may be our fear or our anxiety, our sadness, whatever it is, whatever it's telling us, when we know it's coming from this other place, that it's not about us, it's not based in our authenticity, our honesty, our compassion, our kindness, and our curiosity. It's not based on those things. It's based on this trigger that we have. Then we have to override and talk ourselves into it. The first thing that I ever learned, I've said this since nearly when I started wilderness therapy, I realized it shortly after. The very first thing that I learned about children in the wilderness is that they were much more resilient than they or their parents thought they were. It doesn't mean they don't have deficits and traumas, because they do. I mean, that's what we're treating. But they're capable of going through difficulty and intense, uncomfortable feelings that they must come through, essentially, in order to heal, in order to grieve. Carl Jung said it famously. He said, neuroses, you can substitute the phrase mental health issues, but neuroses is a substitute form of legitimate suffering. Our symptoms, although they present as suffering, it's still a substitute from authentic suffering. And so part of our job in the family structuring we do with you is to try to get you into a place, give you a perspective and a position psychologically that you're able to sit with, be with, support your child without falling into those old dances that all of us in families fall into. The idea of forgiveness. I think a lot of parents struggle with forgiveness. I mean, that's one of the things that kids hold their parents hostage with. And I have a lot to say about this. I wrote a blog on this some time ago called Will My Child Forgive Me? And first and foremost, healthy people forgive people. Even in cases of abuse, of acute abuse, which this is not one of those cases. But even in those cases, when I work with a client, the goal is forgiveness. Right? The goal is to let go. The goal is to go through your hurt, your anger, to validate it, to sit with it, to allow it, and then to forgive. My simple response to parents is your children will forgive you when they grow up and get healthy. But if we allow ourselves to be held hostage by their threat of non-forgiveness, by their cut off, we can't possibly be doing well for them or by them. And again, it's an incredible, subtle balance, because so much of this work is about learning to hear your children. I'm going to talk next week about the assignments that we have and how so much of it challenges the parent to listen to the child's story and anger and hurt. But at the same time, and we allow that to inform us, we try to hold it with as much compassion and generosity of spirit as we can. But at the same time, we need not be driven. It's critical that we not be driven by our child's image of us, right? It's because parenting is in many ways, it's a one-way kind of energy focus. It's from up to down. It is, I'm here for you. You're not here for me. That's not your primary role in this relationship, is to be here for me. So when we ask them, when we need them, to forgive us because we haven't forgiven us ourselves, because we can't come to terms with our own humanity, with our own humanness. We, in essence, ask them to take us on as their responsibility. We cannot parent in a healthy way in that perspective. They know your weaknesses and fears as an individual. I talk about it this way. We load the gun, the metaphorical gun that they point back at us, and we label each bullet with what we are afraid of. If I need to be a fair father, or a non-abandoning father, or a loving father, a kind father, pick the adjective that you find to be most valuable to you, the thing that you value the most, the thing you want to be, that you strive to be the most. Then you accusing me of not being that is going to be my most vulnerable point. And it comes out often like this. I'll use the example of, you don't care about me. Children might say that to their parents, you don't care about me. And the only solution to you caring about them, the only proof to them that they will accept that you care about them, is if you do what they want. And so you're in this no-win situation, and you try to prove that you care about them. You can't control how your children feel. You can only control how you participate in the relationship. In other words, you can't control whether they feel love. You can only control how much you love and how you love. And so there is this, it is an incredibly subtle distinction of letting go, but still participating in an active, courageous, authentic, powerful, empowered way. They don't want they don't want to take care of you, but this helps in getting what they want. In the end, we all kind of realize how and how much we take care of our parents. And in a fundamental, important way in child development, children don't want to take that on. They don't want to be able to sense what you need and then be willing to give it to you at their own expense. They don't want that. But it also aids in manipulation, right? I don't want, I can't, ideally, I don't want to be responsible for how you feel about yourself. That's a burden too heavy for me to carry. But I'm going to use it in these moments to get what I want. It's just an unconscious process. They don't want you to take care of yourself. In other words, a lot of the work that I talk about boundaries is about self-care, right? I was just coaching a family today that we're talking about a potential boundary with one of their young adult sons. And then we were discussing a potential boundary of something the son was asking of them, and they'd come to the conclusion that they just didn't feel comfortable with it. And they had previous experiences where they had given into this and felt resentful because they constantly were expecting him to do it the way that he wanted to perform, to respond the way that they wanted to. But in this instance, they'd come to the conclusion that they were just uncomfortable doing this particular favor. And I applauded them and I said, fantastic. That's you taking care of you. But in the case of parenting, and in many cases, people aren't necessarily going to applaud you for taking care of yourself, right? The more enlightened the individual is, the more they're going to see that. When a person comes to you and says, I'm doing this to take care of myself, I'm sorry it hurts you, but I need this to be okay. An enlightened person can experience the grief or the sadness of the effect of that on the one hand, but at the same time honor and even reinforce in you the healthy self-care. So taking care of yourself, being okay, right? Having healthy boundaries is something they unconsciously resist in many cases. In the end, I will tell you this though, fundamentally it is one of the most nurturing, powerful, helpful, productive, effective processes in parenting. Good self-care in parenting, healthy, active self-care in parenting is one of the best gifts that you can ironically give to your child so that you can be there for them. They aren't making, they don't, we do a lot in therapy about trying to make the unconscious conscious, right? Trying to raise awareness, to understand the the source of the symptoms, if you will. And we talk about that a lot. I talk about that a lot. How symptoms and mental health issues and addictions are basically our wounds, the manifestations of our wounds. But that's not conscious. And a lot of times, children want to say that it's conscious and easy, that I can make it conscious decision to stop. Most of therapy, first of all, most of therapy takes years. And wilderness therapy is a fantastic accelerated start to that process. But most therapy for all of us takes many, many years. And then that's not something we can get around. And most of it is not conscious. You don't make a shift consciously. Becoming conscious is a part of it. Like I said earlier, being able to override your impulse takes a lot of practice because we believe in the impulse. When we have anxiety, we believe it's telling us the truth. When we have old traumas and we have what people would call in therapy a trauma response, it's an incredibly difficult force to override. So when children talk about coming home or last time I was working on this, I was just telling people what they wanted to hear. I was just BSing, but now I'm sincere. And what we know as clinicians, what we know as adults, for the most part, is it takes a lot more work. If I told you that I was going to get in shape for running another Ironman triathlon, the proof would be in the pudding, right? The proof would be in the work in the day-to-day. You would know it if you saw me exercising for long hours, changing my diet, focusing on my physical endurance and health. So it's not that simple as flipping on a switch. And most children want to believe it is. It's probably part of what being immature is. And most children definitely want their parents to believe that it's a switch that they can flip. And then this idea of I don't need to win the debate. The debate is winning. That's that old adage that getting into an argument with a teenager, and teenagers in this case goes up to the mid-20s. Getting into a debate with a teenager is like getting in the wrestling match with a pig in the mud. The problem is the pig enjoys it. And again, this is not conscious. Most of this could not be articulated. That's why there's so little value sometimes in the information that I give you in terms of you going back to your child and telling them to them. I haven't said this in a while, but almost none of the stuff that I teach you, including all of this, none of this is for you to repeat. But a lot of parents want to take ideas like this and take it back to their children because they want to, again, it's kind of a way of debating them. If I can prove to you what you're doing, show you what you're doing, show you what you know, show you how you're manipulating, I can get you to change your behavior. And then I don't have to go about the difficult task of setting a boundary and dealing with those consequences. So it's you knowing this stuff. It's you being aware of it, being aware of where and how you fall short of the ideal. I think enlightenment a lot is about, it starts off with knowing the ideal and having some sense about how far away you are from it. As I get older and the more work that I do personally in my own therapy, I'm more and more clear on an ideal response in a situation. I can't execute it all the time, of course. I fail at it all the time on a daily basis. But I have some sense of what it looks like. And then I can look after the fact, or like I said, I can learn to override it in a moment. I talked about this a moment ago. It's not intrinsically bad. It just is. And sometimes I think we use that. Sometimes I think we use that to warn other people or to inform other people that might be working with our children. But sometimes we parents want the badness to be out there. Right? We want the fix to be out there. We don't want it to be in here. That is an incredibly heroic task to consider our part in it. So I think that's part of why we use it. The definition of it, course, is to influence or manage shrewdly or deviously. He manipulated public opinion in his favor, or to tamper with or falsify for personal gain, tried to manipulate stock principles or prices. But I think when we talk about it, we just talk about it as a dance and a dynamic. And really, ideally, as therapists, we use any resources that the child has, including their fantastic capacity to read what other people want, and to get what they want, we want to turn that into an asset, and so do a lot of you. You talk about that all the time with us. Like if he turns this in, or she turns this in to a positive, then she's going to be the president of the United States. She's going to be a great lawyer, a great salesperson, and those kinds of things. I think the question becomes, does it become a harmful dynamic in a relationship, or is it harmless? I think those are the questions to ask more. Like I said, it's a confession in many cases rather than an accusation. And then this idea of projective identification. Begin to learn how you feel around your child. I had somebody tell me this week again, and I've heard this many times in a lot of my sessions. People will have the response and they'll say, after our session, I'm clear. After our phone call, I'm clear. And then I get into the situation and I'm flooded. Right? That's a normal kind of oscillation, kind of experience for people. It happens in my own therapy, in my own work sometimes. And so what has happened is something, and in many cases is projective identification, has come into the scenario. So you begin to ask yourself, who is this feeling that I'm having? And this is the amazing thing. In projective identification, the feeling that you're having is it's often diagnostic, which means if you're feeling powerless or helpless, frustrated, whatever it is, impotent, you might ask yourself, is this possibly how they are feeling? And so as a therapist, we try to use that diagnostically. I was supervising one of my therapists this week. We were talking about a challenging case. And he was describing over and over again the feeling that he was having with a father that he was working with. And my response to him was, I think that might be perfectly diagnostic. And the way you want to respond, the feelings you have might be exactly how he's feeling. And when you know that, then you can distance yourself from it. You cannot be driven by it. You can have compassion for them because it's an uncomfortable feeling. And you can respond in a much more effective way. Be aware of the induction. Don't fight the projections. Don't fight them. Just let them have it. And I like parents to talk about their own responses. Like, I'm having the impulse to do X, but I'm going to do Y. Right? My first instinct was to respond this way to you. Or everything in me tells me that I want to respond this way, but I'm going to do something different because I'm trying to change the dynamic, change the dance. Sometimes the way that we try to manage is by using techniques like guilting, promising, terrorizing, threatening, these kinds of things. And these kinds of things are simply how our children learn to manipulate and control people. Telling you you're bad, saying things. Now, I've always thought it fascinating that children have said to their parents, you don't forgive me. You should get past all of my bad mistakes, all of my bad behavior. And they use it like to hold you hostage, like somehow something is wrong if you don't forgive. It's okay to still be hurt. It's okay to still be skeptical. Just own it. Like, I'm not ready yet. And owning it is different than making it about them. But they do that. You don't trust me is another example. And the answer might be, I don't yet. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry if that hurts. But right now, I don't trust you. There's a lot of evidence that I have a lot of wounds, and I'm not ready to move past that yet. I haven't had enough time. So you see how you start to own your own life, your own truth, your own self, and create separation, healthy separation, which is really healthy connection. I said that quickly, but healthy separation is really healthy connection. You promised. I can't tell you how many parents have shared with us that when they try to describe the program to their child on the front, and not all the parents do that. Fewer do that than not. But when they try to describe the program, you cannot win at that. You can't describe it. They're going to make it fail during a hard day. But saying things like, you promise, it's okay to change your promise. If I'm trying to talk my child into a doctor's visit or a dentist visit, and they're anxious about it, and I say, look, it's just a checkup. It's just, this is what we're going to do. And then we get in there, and I find out that there's new information, and we need to do something about it today. It's okay to break that. That's a healthy promise break, right? I'm sorry, I promise I probably ought not to have. I thought also that, and you have a right to feel angry or sad about it. So talking about it in that way can be helpful. Them promising things, it's really promising what they'll do really isn't that important, right? It's more important what they did today and yesterday that gives me evidence of where they're at than what they promised to do. It's not very complicated for the typical evoke student or client. It's not very complicated to figure out the right things to promise. So we pay more attention to what's happening right now today. That's our best predictor of the future. And and a healthy trying to sell you something is a problem. I always talk about that with parents. If you feel like you're being sold something, you're being asked to buy something, take a step back. Get yourself out of that dynamic and adopt a we'll see attitude. Terrorizing you, I think at home that happens, of course, more. The wilderness provides a break for that for many families, but it's a relentless, chronic, exhausting, wearing you down kind of experience. It becomes so much so that people describe it commonly as I'm walking on eggshells. And again, a good piece of that is in you. It has become a part of them and a part of the dance, but the fear, the anxiety, trying to control things, trying to manage outcomes, that is the course that leads to this walking on eggshells, walking through a minefield type of feeling that parents express. Threatening you, and sometimes they threaten abandonment. And I thought about this a few years ago because I've heard this threat for many, many years. But a few years ago, I thought it's a strange thing that children are threatening to abandon their parents. Like that's not a thing. Right? That's the idea is ideally, if my child comes to me and threatens to abandon me, my idea is, well, I would be sad. But I'm not going to change my truth just so you won't abandon me. So I'm sorry. That breaks my heart. But that's not what I'm committed to. That's not why I became a parent. So to be loved. I didn't become a parent to be cherished and honored and appreciated, to have gratitude thrown my way. I became a parent to love, to give, to support you and life to go where it needs to go. And that's my commitment, right? That's the ideal kind of thinking that goes into it. So when parents tell me about harmful or hurtful things that their children say to them, I talk about an ideal. The ideal is that it doesn't affect us. In my ideal moments when my child says the harshest, most threatening thing to me, I hate you, I never want to talk to you, whatever it is. In my moments where I'm grounded and okay, it doesn't even bother me. I don't even hear it as real. It's nonsense anyway. And I'm not going to capitulate based on that threat because I'm going to take care of me. You don't have to. Number one. And number two, if I can't take it anymore, if it's relentless, if it's a lot, then I'm going to just leave. I'm going to leave the discussion, the room, right? I'm going to escalate until I can be safe. All the way to the point of if it becomes physically aggressive and violent, I'm going to call the police. Whatever it takes. I'm going to get myself out of that situation. So, kind of inadvertently reinforcing kind of that terrorizing, the threatening, the blackmail, the intimidation is what can lead to this escalating dynamic. Sometimes they threaten, I will fail, I will not change, I will get worse, and I will dig in. I always said to children, okay, tell me how. I mean, literally, I would say to them, and I would walk away and say, tell me how that works. I'll be curious next week, and completely detached from it. And so often they're like, no, 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 stop, don't leave. Sometimes they'd let me leave, and I'd say, so how is it? Giving up? Like, how's it going for you? Because we're not going to be held hostage by the threats. I am sad and you need to fix it. My son, my 24-year-old son, he just bought a goat. And I asked him how it was going just a few minutes ago, actually, while I was late to the webinar. And he said, yesterday was one of the worst days ever. And I said, tell me about it. It's a baby goat. And he said, well, they have a dog, and goats are herd animals, and they don't like to be alone. And so somebody not knowingly took the dog away for a few hours to play with it. And my son Jake was left at home, and the goat cried this horrific cry. Loud, my son said, insensitively and rudely. And he loves this little goat of his. And he said it got to the point where he felt rage. He actually thought to himself, he had visions of like strangling the goat. And I said, yeah, it's hard. I said, I got to tell you, I've had those feelings and thoughts for my young children when they were crying, and I couldn't stop them. I felt impotent and powerless to change anything. And there's nothing worse than hearing the cry of something that you're responsible to take care of. And we kind of laughed about it, and it was a moment of perspective. This happened 20 minutes ago, 20 minutes before the webinar. So it's an instinct. It's most likely part of our survival instinct as a species, and it can backfire on us when establishing healthy boundaries and healthy relationships to respond to the, I am sad and you need to fix it, instead of I'm sad and can you be with me in that. And like I said, this idea of you are blank, fill in the blank about what you don't want to be, and the only way to prove that you aren't, the only way to get evidence that you're not that thing is to do X, Y, or Z. I asked the therapist about these ideas, and they talked about some highlights in the work that they do with parents. Guilt is a corrosive emotion for most parents, right? It is. I've said this. It's in my book that there's even talk in Brene Brown's talk that shame is unhealthy and guilt is associated with health. She says that. It's not true. It's not. It's coincidentally aligned with healthy decisions, but fundamentally, guilt is a corrosive feeling. It's basically a milder form, perhaps, of shame. This idea that shame is feeling bad for who you are and guilt is feeling bad for what you do. Well, like I've said many, many times, parents, people who come to me and say, I know what the right thing to do is, but I didn't do it, or I can't do it, or I don't do it. And I say, why? So often the response is guilt. Guilt is something we have to get rid of in our lives. It doesn't make us amoral, because we learn to develop a sensibility, a groundedness, a morality based in authenticity, truth, honesty, and love. And people who do a good job of exercising guilt out of their life are more capable of showing up in life, in relationships, in a powerful, honest, loving, kind, compassionate way. My experience is people who work to remove guilt from their lives do more good in the world by far than people who are driven by it. Watch out for flight to health. Flight to health is that, children would often say to me in the field, they would say, this program was good. It was a wake up call. I'm fixed. 1 week was fantastic, but one more week will be an absolute disaster and waste of time. Or I'm happy, I'm fixed. I realized I was wrong. It was my fault. My parents were good. All those things that you want to hear. Watch out for flight to health. Flight to health is a much more common and insidious form of resistance than outright defiance. Most of the time, when we think of therapeutic resistance, most people think of defiance, lack of cooperation, not doing things. Flight to health is a more difficult part of resistance. To be cured is more difficult to deal. They will try to split the executive system. I just talked to my 9-year-old this morning. I think it was this morning or yesterday morning, because she was parent shopping. We're going on a trip this weekend, and I had set up some things after long discussions and listening to everybody, and finally come to some decisions. We had come to some decisions as a couple, and then my 9-year-old was trying to shift some of the agenda, and I said, we're not going to do it. I'm so sorry. And then I heard her. She walked out of my office, walked into the other room, and I heard her telling, Dad says I'm not going to be able to do this. Will you let me do this? Just perfect. She had lost access to my vulnerabilities, and she was going to go try it on her mom. So splitting the executive system. Shame on you, mom and dad, for relying on support. I love this one, right? I can't believe you need therapists to parent. I can't believe you need experts in your life to parent. My response is, yeah, I do. I need a lot of help. This is really hard. The interesting thing about that is they don't want you to listen to the voice of the experts, but they do want you to listen to their voice, right? So shame on you for relying on support. I'm not manipulating you. I'm telling you how I feel. That's a common phrase. Understanding the intention of telling you how I feel is important. How many times you say it, what tone you say it in, right? What's your goal? What do you want from telling me this? That's why one of the 8 tips that I talk about in the 8 tools for transforming relationships webinar, podcast, and blog, I talk about what's the intention. Asking yourself and telling the other what your intention is on the front end, or when somebody shares something with you, saying, "What's your intention? What would you like from me?" I think it's probably the most simple and most underutilized tool that could help us in our relationships, is to pause, to ask ourselves the question, to ask the other person that question. Kids holding parents accountable, drugs, divorce, false plus. We believe that a big piece of this is coming to the table as vulnerable, right? Coming to the table as, look, I'm sorry, as a parent, I've hurt you. I'm going to be doing my own work. I need to do my own work. I need help. I think I've been a part of this dance with you. But there's a difference between holding you accountable, right? Shifting the discussion. Why do I have to stop using drugs? My dad drinks too much. Why do I have to look at my aggression? My mom yells at me, whatever it is. That's when it becomes a problem. And I think parents, because again, not coming to terms with their own imperfection, their own humanness, I think can be held hostage by that. Children are ready to move on when they're not demanding it, right? When they're not saying, this is all what I need, then they're ready to move on. But when they're making a list of things that they need, they're not focusing on what they need to do. Children that in my experience, a lot of children have said, I'm ready to move, I'm ready to go on to the next phase and so forth. I've said, well, it's not happening today, right now, but until then, what are you going to do here? Like, what are you going to do with your time? Because you're leaving. It's time to leave. When your parents come out to pick you up and the truck pulls up, that's when you know. So until then, what are you going to do? Because life is kind of like this. See, this is the I think one of the subtle points of wellness therapy. It's so fantastic. It's so dynamic. It's an amazing intervention. And then you go back to the world and it's just Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays. They're just like that. They're not dynamic. They're not powerful processes. How are you going to deal with that? So the idea, I'm ready to move on. Withdrawing affection, withdrawing emotion is another way. I think a lot of us, I've been hooked by this. We value insight over action. What a child says in therapy over what they're doing. I think both have their value, but if we exclude or favor one too much, I think we miss the whole picture. Like I've talked about all night, they know your guilt button. Weeping, powerful displays of behavior, threatening, distracting with your faults. Again, I'm the first to say you have them. All of us have them, and I want you to become more and more acquainted with your faults, more and more aware of them, more and more comfortable talking about, looking at, and addressing them. But distracting with your faults doesn't work. And then the good tools with the bad act, using an I feel statement to manipulate somebody, for example. Weaponizing therapy skills is a common way that people kind of hide their manipulation. Let's talk about, this is from a handout that I don't know where we got from years ago, called How to Manipulate Your Parents. So there's a couple of pages of this. The adolescent game plan: wear them down, hit them where it hurts, and leave them tired and confused, right? That's why having an outside source, a therapist, a sponsor, to go get grounded with over and over again can help relieve you, can give you perspective. So many times in my life I've looked back on a relationship and I've thought to myself, why did I allow that? Right? What was I missing? What did I not know about mental health and wellness then that I know so very clearly now? That's a helpful part of the process. Defiance, just do what you want to do anyway, and see if your parents get so disgusted that they'll just give up with the rules. We've seen that. Begging, please, please, please. Bargaining. This happens a lot. It's almost like the stages of grief, and I think participants go through try several of these with their parents through the process. Explicit or implied. It's an implied bargain or similar to a bribe. For example, cleaning the house first and then asking to do something, right? So watching for that. Timing, cornering, ask mom or dad for permission for something when they're busy on the phone or stressed out or unable to process the information. I've actually had some of those happen during webinars in the past 10 years. I've had my children slide me a note under the computer asking me for something that I need to take some time with. They're fantastic at that. Repeating, making the same request over and over again and see if you can get a different answer than no. You've got nothing to lose. Right? I'll say to the clients, to parents, 1 time is okay, 2 is forgivable, but the 3rd time, what's going on? Then it's just outright manipulation. Crying, acting pathetic, give parents the message that only they can make it better if they just do, buy, or get permission for X, Y, or Z. Lots of whining too works like a charm. Irritation, bug your parents enough so that it feels like an ancient Chinese torture, and your parents will give right in just to shut you up. This works really well in stores, church, people's homes, and other public places. Demanding justification, demanding reasons, answers, and proof. Try why not? Don't you trust me? I think this is a common one for our parents. I hear parents trying to justify or explain their behavior to the child to make it okay. Don't do that. You don't have to do that. You have to say, all you have to say is with kindness and compassion is, just like I said with my 9-year-old this morning, this is what we're doing on Saturday. I'm sorry. The whole family's doing it, and you're allowed to be upset. I'm not saying because I told you so and buck up or like it, but trying to explain why I did it, to make it right so that I don't have to set a boundary doesn't work. It reinforces and fosters this dynamic. Misquoting, very effective when used with splitting. Quote your parents as having said next week when he or she actually said maybe next week. Promises. I promise to clean my room after I get back. It doesn't matter if the promise is kept or not. Splitting. Ask mom or dad separately. We talk about this in the field all the time with staff. They do it between staff shifts. It's one of the reasons why having 8-day shifts is so powerful. So much better than residential schools and programs shifts, right? There's no other format in therapy where the frontline staff are with you for 8 days in a row, 13, 14, 15 hours a day. But they do it between staff shifts sometimes. See if you can get them to argue and thus deflect the issue away from your request. Guilt tripping. Give your parents the message: if you really loved me, you would let me, or if you were good parents, you would. Don't forget the ever popular variation. So and so's parents let him or her do it. It helps to imply that you'll be emotionally shattered or socially scarred for the rest of eternity unless your parents give in. Threatening, either explicit or implicit, or implied. Could be a threat to get even, to show them, to hurt yourself, or just defy your parents. Remember, you're in control. Punishing family by actions. A payback, for example. Accidentally track in mud. Play music too loud. Stay in the bathroom too long. A sullen face, sulking, or silent, pouting are helpful. You're a bad parent. Complain, say, don't you think I deserve it? Laugh at your parents. Point out that your parents are so stupid, and or point out where parents are inconsistent. Again, the antidote to this is the idiot parent intervention that I talk about. Just accept the fact that you're an idiot, and there's no argument anymore. And by idiot, I mean that you're human. That you, of course, aren't going to get right all the time, and you've come to terms with that, and you're working on it. And they have no idea how much work you need. Hurting them, rarely tell them or show them that you love them, respect them, or will in adulthood appreciate what they've done for you. Swear to them that they'll never see their grandkids unless they straighten up. Remember, actions speak louder than words. Again, being susceptible to this one, and all of us have some of that somewhere on the continuum. It flips the parenting responsibility, the relationship responsibility, upside down and backwards. It's not the child's job to take care of me. It's my job to take care of them. Lying, either by commission or omission, simple and easy. For example, not telling your parents that so-and-so's parents are out of town and asking to spend the night at so-and-so's house. Helpless, behave in a way to try to convince your parents that you are helpless. This will activate their parenting instincts and they'll rescue you. You know, I like the assignment to talk with your children about what you think your most susceptible manipulations are and have them talk about it too. Like say, here's where I'm most vulnerable. Some parents have a hard time putting it out there because they think it's going to be used against them. The unspoken is more potentially harmful than the spoken. The more you make it overt, the more you put it on the table, the less vulnerable that you are to it. So talk about it. Make this make your own vulnerabilities, your own buttons, your own issues part of the dialogue. And even do this as an exercise can be a helpful way of taking some of the power out of it. And how do you resist it? You work on yourself. You know yourself. You become honest with yourself and your vulnerabilities. You don't have to fix everything. You don't have to be perfect at this or you're doomed and so are your children. You just have to make it a project. Stick together in groups. You know, it's the idea of a co-therapist. Co-therapy, one of the benefits is that there's somebody always in the room with their head above water, so to speak. So find people to talk to that you trust, that you don't feel judged by, that you can stay grounded and grounded with. Learn to react more slowly. Take time. I love it when parents, I had a parent this last week tell me that they were proud of themselves because they were asked a difficult question. They did something different. They just took time. They didn't answer right away. You have permission to take time and you have permission to change your mind. Focus on what you do, not what they do. Make that your primary focus. When you're worried about their relapse, worry about your relapse. When you think about their relapse prevention plan, think about your relapse prevention plan. When you see them regressing, think about examples when you've regressed. Focus on your intentions rather than outcomes. Parenting principles as an end rather than a means to an end. Stay committed and don't stray from the goal. Don't make a decision at the wrong time. In a moment, my therapist uses the phrase "strike while the iron is cold." It's a ironic take on the comment of "strike while the iron is hot." When things are escalated or upregulated or anxiety or a lot of energy, don't make decisions in those moments if you possibly can, unless there's a life-threatening situation. So, happy to take any topic-related questions. Every term you address in this webinar is the exact actions of my daughter. Yet my responses are almost exactly what you say to do. Yet it never has worked out. Why is that? It's a great question. Wonderful question. Probably something more subtle is going on. But even that question, remember, parenting is an end and not a means to an end. Don't measure outcomes, but measure, like, healthy parenting is its own reward. Healthy parenting is better living. The healthy change in parents that we teach changes parents and not children. So if I don't know, I'd have to watch it in real time, but my suspicion is there's still a hope for a different kind of response. But we know that things get extinguished when they stop. If it doesn't work, they don't do it. And so something is working with it. There's some payoff to that, whatever they're doing. There's something. And so we would just have to explore and look at what's the payoff? What are they getting? Because if it doesn't have any effect, it might just be to emotionally punish you, to exhaust you over time. I don't know. But there's probably some payoff that's still there that's more subtle. All right. Thought there were more questions. There'll be one more slide for a question. We want all parents that are with us to go to 6 12-step support groups. Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Nar-Anon, Al-Anon, Alateen is for teenagers. Or you can also go to NAMI.org to find classes and resources in parenting. Follow us on social media. This helps for announcements, for inspirational stories and pictures. You can listen to the podcast on your iOS, your Apple device. You go to Evoke Therapy Programs. You search Evoke Therapy Programs on the podcast app. And if you have an Android device, download the SoundCloud app and search Evoke Therapy Programs. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Evoke Therapy. Facebook, search Evoke Therapy Programs. You go to the Second Nature Alumni Foundation on Facebook. That's an organization that's set up to help people who can't afford therapy, can't afford therapeutic placement. And of course, follow us on our blog, our team's blog. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Also, audio versions are available through Audible on those portals. You can go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page. Those are books that are recommended on various topics by our therapists. Buying books under the Amazon Smiles program, and a percentage of the proceeds goes to help the charity for people who can't afford therapy. I'll be in New York next week on the 7th. Southern California. We only have a few spots left in our Southern California parent meeting. So if you want to come, please RSVP ASAP. We can run out of room in that one. So that's on June 11th. And on June 12th, I'm in San Mateo from 7 to 9. That Southern California one is, of course, in the afternoon on Sunday to help avoid traffic, potluck beforehand. Email Andrea@evoketherapy.com to RSVP or for more information on any of these. The next workshop is July 20th, 29th, and 30th. We want all current parents, so that would be new parents in this case. We want all current parents to go to a workshop if they possibly can. You can combine that with a field visit. So if you're just new to Evoke or you're listening to this webinar or podcast later, then see about scheduling that for you and your family. Coming up this summer, we've announced our summer dates. We have Finding You in June and July. And then we're doing a special on-location one in Toronto, Canada. So if you're from Toronto, we're going to try this. We've been told that we have a lot of people that want to go to it. We're going to be doing it in August in Toronto. I think the dates are wrong. Andrea, will you check up the dates? I think I forgot to, those are the wrong dates in Toronto, and I want to give the correct dates before this is over. So if you could let me know about that. It's later in the month, I believe. And then private intensives, if you want to do a private intensive for your family, you can schedule those. You can customize those, schedule those at any time. Contact intensives@evoketherapy.com. Finding You is for individuals. Finding Family is for families. We have our Pursuits program, which are our high adventure programs for young adults or families all over the world. All kinds of activities. You can customize it, do all kinds of fun, sober, adventure therapy, and adventure work, and with a light therapeutic support. All right, another question. My son refused to go back to therapy to his first home visit. We held the line and eventually he went back. I'm angry and worried the pain I felt as he left the house into the night. I don't want to speak to him right now. Is that acceptable? I think that's acceptable. It's okay. We get hurt. I'm not telling you not to be hurt, but what you're doing is taking care of yourself. And you can just say that I need to take care of myself. And yes, they'll take some of that on. But it's critical that you take care of yourself. Just own it. It's my hurt. I'm going to take care of it. I can't be there for you in the way that you need me to right now. I mean, that's what you're thinking and saying. They're not going to like it or agree with it. They're going to accuse you of something, but it's okay. I'm telling you, this is the voice, and you can't talk them into it being a good thing, it being something they agree with. The dates for the Toronto Finding You are August 22nd through 25th outside of Toronto. Any more, Andrea? A child's payoff seems to be the immediate gratification with no regard to the consequences that always happens later. How are we to promote a healthier primary response? It's a complex, it's a big question and a good question and a complex set of principles, but it's just learning how to parent authentically in an awakened state, with kindness and love and compassion, but strong and firm, and all of that gets really sourced from a strong sense of yourself. So it's the answer is doing your work. You'll have greater peace, clarity, and serenity. You'll even be more effective. But you kind of have to, in some ways, somewhat block that out of your mind, because if you think too much in terms of outcomes, then it'll just come across, it will be controlling. So you let go of the outcomes and you do the best you can. You do the best in self-improvement that you can, and you don't tie the quality of your parenting to, especially the short game. Not the short game wins. I'm telling you, in the long game, in the long run, these things pay off, but in the short run, they often don't. In behaviorism, they have something called an extinction burst. And an extinction burst is that we see an increase in behavior and negative behavior when we stop reinforcing it, or when there's inconsistent reinforcement and we stop reinforcing it. That just gives us an awareness to get past that extinction burst. And the more inconsistent the response has been, or perhaps the more resilient, the more feisty the child is, the longer that extinction burst is going to go. But in the long run, being held hostage by it isn't going to help you or him or her anyway. All right, folks, that's the last question. Next week, we're continuing to evolve here at Evoke. It's part of our founding philosophy, and we're going to change the letter of accountability to the letter of awareness. I'm going to talk about facilitating accountability. I'm going to talk about the 3 pillars of Evoke's program: the new hopes and intentions letter, the letter of awareness, and the impact letter that the child writes to the parent. That'll be next Thursday, June 8th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. So I look forward to that. I hope these webinars and these podcasts are helpful and supportive. I hope they can give you, through repetition, that awareness of a new sensibility, a new way of being in relationship to yourself and to your child, and thus what will come out of that is clarity in your decision making about what to do. All right, folks, have a great evening. Take care. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.